and I take my glasses off. Because I'm like, I don't know if I should wear my glasses, but I can't read without them.
I'm getting to that point myself, and I'm have just enough of an ego that I'm resisting getting reading glasses. Like now I just turn to her and say, hey, read this label. I can't read it. Getting old sucks.
It does. Tell me about it. I gotta hit up my fan.
Now, the problem for me is my brain still says I'm free.
Welcome, everyone. You're watching In the Crosshairs, and I'm your host, Raquel Okyay, and my special guest today is Dan Roberts. Thank you so much, Dan, for coming to my show. I asked you to come on because I know that you're an expert. You're definitely an expert in guns. You are a writer for Amaland, and you've also done other print media on gun rights, and you've also appeared on radio and television. You're also an instructor and a trainer and a coach. I think you're fantastic. So I think you're a goldmine of information. And as you know, we spoke the other night, and you talked about the topic that you wanted to cover today, which I think is fantastic, because it's one of those topics that really needs to be talked about, but the mainstream is avoiding it because they avoid the main topics. Instead, they want to create that boogeyman, right? The NRA, somebody else's fault. And what we're going to talk about today goes directly to the problem of school shootings. And I think that's important for the public to have this conversation. So I know you do a lot of study on guns, and you had mentioned that you were studying particularly this topic, and that's the effect of psychotropic drugs on school shootings.
Yes, absolutely, Raquel, and thanks for having me on. I agree with you. This is an incredibly important topic that, yeah, no one in the mainstream media or in Congress or anything like that are having a conversation about. I started looking into it right after Sandy Hook happened, and I wrote a column in the spring of 2013 for AmmoLand.com where I had went back over the last 25 years or so and discovered that every mass shooter in that time frame had either been actively taking or had recently stopped taking what are called SSRIs, or Selective Serotonin Reuptake Inhibitors. They are a very powerful class of psychotropic drugs. And I mean, there is definitely not a concrete causation factor where we can say with confidence, if you're taking this, then this is what will happen. But there is an overwhelming amount of circumstantial evidence that I believe, and several other more prominent people like doctors have come out, publicly said that there needs to be an investigation about what's going on with these drugs. One of them is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist named Dr. Peter Breggin. He has written several academically peer-reviewed white papers on these drugs and their effects, and he has flat out said that the side effects can cause increased suicidality, increased homicidality, all kinds of aberrant ideations. These are dangerous drugs, and when we're giving them to kids, at the same time that everybody's talking about how kids' brains aren't fully formed until they're 25. And it seems like such an obvious, like, hey, wait a minute, this probably isn't a good idea. We need to look at this, and nobody wants to talk about it.
They don't. They avoid the real problem, and it would explain why maybe our generation, you and I, we didn't have school shootings.
Correct.
And at the same time, we also weren't drugged like the kids are being drugged now.
That's absolutely correct. I did a radio show last week where I pointed out up through the late 1980s, it was incredibly common in all parts of the country for kids to take their guns to school for all different reasons. Some of them were on the school trap team or the school rifle team. Some of them maybe went hunting before or after school. Some of them, sometimes maybe they took their rifle or shotgun in because they were in wood shop or metal shop and they were doing it as a project for grade. And school shootings were incredibly rare events. The other thing that was incredibly common growing up as a kid in the 70s and 80s was we all had arsenals of very realistic cap guns. Some of them even had functioning.
I remember that too.
Yeah. And we would spend all day during the summer running all over town or all over the woods with our friends, playing cops and robbers or soldier or war, or whatever it was you called it.
Right.
where we're pretending to shoot each other, and we all had access to actual firearms, but the idea of shooting on somebody else with a real gun never entered our minds.
Right. That I agree, and that's circumstantial evidence.
Right.
So what you found in your research is that most of these school shootings, these children have some type of connection with being drugged?
Yes, absolutely. And I also spoke with a court-recognized expert, I believe, if I recall correctly, she's based out of Texas. She runs a website called SSRIstories.com.
Okay.
He is a court-recognized expert on the subject that has documented over 4,000 cases from all over the world of extreme, unpredictable violence, particularly in young teenagers or young men that are actively taking these drugs or recently stopped taking the drug right before they committed their act.
Has this research reached any type of mainstream or into the halls of Congress, you know, on a state level or a national level, in the sense that, as you know, politicians, I think, really should be addressing this problem? And are we drugging our kids to do these acts, these criminal acts, which are aberrant? It's not normal to want to pick up a gun. I remember as a kid or a teenager, you know, we kind of had turf wars. We had
Right.
turf wars in the city when you grew up in the city. And we had fights, you know, we had fights between like one park against another park. And we used our fists.
Right.
I mean, maybe now people would see us and they would think that that's strange, but it wasn't. And we would beat each other up. We'd beat each other, turf wars. And then when it was all over, we were friends again.
That's exactly right. And I had much the same experience growing up in the suburbs of Philadelphia in South Jersey. Our rivalries more focused around the school sports teams and things like that. You know, our football team's better than your football team, whatever.
Right.
But the same thing, whether it was a crowd or whether it was just somebody, an individual person in school that you didn't like or you were being bullied by or whatever it was a fist fight and it was over and you shook hands and that was it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we didn't shoot each other in school. So we weren't trying to bring guns to school. We weren't trying to seriously hurt anybody. And at the same time, none of us were on these psychotropic drugs either.
Right. And to go to your earlier question, as far as, you know, the mainstream media or Congress looking into it, I would say it's from what I have observed, it's superficial or cursory at best. There was, you know, people. One of the problems is the hyperactive media that we have these days, where everything is 24/7, 365, and people forget about things within a week.
Yeah, that's true.
And back in 2003, and I'll be the first to admit, I forgot about this too until the radio host that I was on with last week brought it up. Back in 2003, Paxil settled a lawsuit with the federal government for $3 billion with a B,
It's a lot.
$3 billion over allegations that they were hiding the adverse side effects of Paxil. Now, I mean, if the company is willing to,
do you think one of the reasons why Congresses, you know, whether on the state level or the federal level, are not looking into this topic is because they might be protecting the pharmaceutical companies?
oh, I think they're protecting their campaign donations. People make a big deal. They talk all the time about how the NRA has bought Congress, and that's laughable. If you look at the actual factual resources that are out there, the NRA isn't even in the top 50 of campaign donors or lobbying donors to members of Congress. The pharmaceutical companies are in the top 5.
Top 5, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they donate to everybody.
Look at what's happening right now, today, as we speak, where they're now having hearings on the Hill about the pharmaceutical companies pumping hundreds of millions of opiate drugs into the country, and how that has triggered the current opioid crisis that everybody's been talking about for the last few years. There's a town in West Virginia that has a population of 800 people, and what is the epicenter of this opioid issue. And I think the figure I heard was something like over the course of the last 4 years, prescriptions in that town have equated to 50 million individual doses of OxyContin.
And that's a very small town.
Right, exactly. Like the amount of drugs that have been prescribed, it's enough for every person in the town to have a lifetime supply.
Yeah, that's the pharmaceutical company, exactly. And I don't know why the mainstream isn't talking about this, because indeed the opiate problem are prescription drugs being abused.
Right.
So and people get their prescription drugs and then they turn around and they sell it at a higher value on the street.
Right.
And this is what creates this market for drugs and the opiate addiction. And they're also very addictive, which is horrendous. I need them to do something about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, like I said, I think it is absolutely because the politicians don't want to lose their donations. And I think to a certain degree, and I'm sure there are people that are going to chuckle about at what I'm about to say, or you know, oh, I'm wearing tinfoil. I think to a certain degree, there are some people that are afraid to speak out because they're afraid of repercussions. It's not like it's unheard of for people that know things they shouldn't know or speak out about things they shouldn't be speaking out about to be threatened, to be intimidated, to be hurt. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but just one quick example. During the Colorado recalls in 2012, several of the activists that were involved with that have reported to me personally, and these are incredibly credible people that I have no reason to believe they're exaggerating or making any of this up. They were surveilled by men in suits driving black Suburbans. They were a couple of them had their family pets killed very graphically and left where they would find them. Phone calls from anonymous voices making threats. So it's not too much of a stretch for me to believe that there are people out there that maybe do know a lot that are afraid to speak out because they're afraid of the consequences. And I think that's a legitimate fear for some people.
I think so too. I think the federal government, the government in general, is just out of control.
Oh, absolutely it is. That's my 8-year-old could tell you that.
I mean, they have too much money. They have too much freedom. They do whatever the heck they want. They just, they're never really, I think, for the most part, they're not really concentrating on the important topics like this one. One of the things I think Congress should do is really do an investigation and really put a halt to this pharmaceutical companies and the drugging of kids and the drugging of adults. I mean, just period. 50% of this nation is on drugs.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily recreational drugs. These are prescription drugs, and they're highly addictive, and they're on the streets now because people get the prescription, then they sell them on the street, as I said.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's something, if Congress is going to do anything to protect the people, why don't they do something about investigating the pharmaceutical companies and putting some kind of halt to their mass distribution of drugs?
Right.
Can we have like an outside advisory team or something to just take a look at the whole picture? They have so much money and so much power that they can bankroll any politician's campaign to get elected. And that's what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and from my research and what I discovered, actually frightened me enough. I have a little bit of a personal connection to this. My son was diagnosed with ADHD a few years ago. And I had it when I was a kid. But for me, what I learned is I learned how to control it and use it for positives, meaning I channel that into writing an article or something like that. I learned how to master that and use it for something good. But within my son's case, with the research that I did to write that article and have these discussions frightened me so much that I've been adamant that I am not putting my son on them with his counselor, with his doctor, with the teachers in his school, because the risks of an adverse side effect, to my mind, from what I've learned, far outweigh any possible benefit. And what has worked for me, and I'm not suggesting this would work for everybody, I started letting him have a quarter cup of coffee every morning. Because look at Ritalin. What is Ritalin? Ritalin is a stimulant. It's basically legalized meth. And it runs counterproductive. When you have a kid that has ADHD and they're just going at 100 miles an hour all day long, most people's instincts would be, well, why would I want to give somebody like that a stimulant? It's like turbocharging them. But it turns out that the stimulant actually has the opposite effect with people with that brain chemistry. So what I started doing is I started letting him have a quarter cup of coffee every morning before he went to school. And when I started that, within a week, one of his teachers had emailed me and said, what did you do? What's he taking? You need to send in a note so the nurse can give him his medicine. He's not taking any medicine. Well, what did you do? I found out about this, and I started letting him have a cup of coffee every morning. Well, it's unbelievable. He's a completely different kid. I can tell by his behavior in the classroom when he has had it in the morning and when he's forgotten to have it in the morning. That's how big of a difference it was. So if I, as a parent, if I can accomplish the same goal with a cup of coffee versus these incredibly dangerous and powerful drugs, it's a no-brainer for me.
Right, and I think that physicians in general, back in our day, they just weren't pushing these drugs. And I have a similar story. When my son was in high school and he was training, he's a clarinet player, a professional clarinet player now, but he was having weekly lessons with a professor at Juilliard. And over time, over a few months, and my son is really talented, and his teacher started, having this conversation with me about, well, Robert's having some trouble focusing. He might do well with potentially, some Ritalin or something. And I thought, okay, you have your opinion, I have mine, no problem. But he kind of was like persistent with the thing. Yep. So finally, I decided I had, a checkup with my son, and we went to my doctor's office, and I happened to have this really cool old school pediatrician. Right. Where he had those little drawers, and he did all the work himself. He knew your name as soon as you walked in. He knows your kids' names. Everything's really cool. Yeah. So I went in and I told Dr. Berman what was going on. That his teacher suggested this and that, and my doctor said, my pediatrician said, Raquel, sit down. Okay, I sat down, and he said, what do you think? Right. I said, I think he's fine. Right. I'm fine. I don't know what to tell you. And he's like, there you go. That's your answer. Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I can tell you one more story, and that's just personal. I had also a very old school pediatrician back in New York. I went into him one day for a checkup, and I told him, look, I'm under a lot of stress, working full time, the kids, everything going on in my life at that time. I said, I wonder if there was something, maybe just to calm me down a little bit. And again, he's like, let's talk in my office. And I sit down, Raquel, you're a very smart lady. I really don't think you want to have this type of, something like this on your record. If you have stress, probably the best thing that you can do is talk to your mom, talk to your family, talk to somebody you trust, get your feelings out, and you'll see that you'll feel better. And it's very practical, very simple advice, and it worked. Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of the change is there's a combination of a lot of factors. It's the profit, and this is all just my opinion. It's the profit motive. It's the as a society, we are always gravitating towards the quick answer instead of the right answer. So it's just easier to hand over a prescription than it is to actually try to diagnose and work through the problem. I think there are a certain number of teachers and school administrators that prefer a classroom full of zombies as opposed to a rambunctious kid that might be a little disruptive, but is also maybe very creative or things of that nature. So it's just, again, it goes to what's the easiest thing to do, not necessarily what's the best thing to do. Yes, and that's unfortunate. And I think that's a conversation that Congress should be having right now. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, that same attitude goes to this topic of gun control. In the early to mid 90s, Richmond, Virginia was having an incredible explosion of violent crime. And they created a joint force between the state prosecutors and the feds. It was Project Exile was the name of it. So anybody can Google this and look it up.
So it was Project Exile. And what they did was they took a very strong stance on violent crimes committed with firearms, and they created a bunch of statutes about, minimum mandatory sentences for these things. And there was not going to be any plea bargaining, and there was not going to be any reduction in charges. And within 2 or 3 years, they slashed the violent crime rate. Absolutely slashed it. In Florida, I lived in Florida for a few years, as you know. When I got my instructor certification for the first time, it was when I lived in Florida. And part of that coursework was we had to be very familiar with Florida law when it came to crime and firearms. And you probably know this. Florida has very strict gun laws as far as crime goes. I believe it's 10-20 life is what it was when I lived there. So if you weren't the person that pulled the trigger, let's just say your buddy, you're out driving around, your buddy runs into a gas station, and you don't know anything about what he's going to do, but he robs the gas station and you happen to be with him. You are, under Florida law, you're automatically getting 10 years in state prison. If he fires the gun, you're automatically getting 20 years in prison. If someone is wounded or killed, you're automatically getting life in prison. There is no plea bargaining, there is no parole, that's it. And Florida has had concealed carry since 1986 and has had these 10-20 life laws, I think, for just about as long, maybe a few years shorter. But those are the things that work. New Jersey, conversely, New Jersey is an absolute joke of a system. They love to brag about how they have the second strictest gun laws in the country. The Brady campaign gives them a B+ or an A- on their annual state reports. And I know from having been born and raised there, from starting my career on this issue there, and I only recently moved away in 2016, they have these incredibly strict gun laws. And then you read on a daily or weekly basis where some gangbanger in Newark or Jersey City or Camden or Patterson or whatever gets caught for the 8th time with a gun on him, and he's given bail. Or he's given a plea bargain and he serves 2 years for what the state statute stipulates is a mandatory 7-year sentence.
Yeah, see, here's the difference. In Florida, we're holding the criminals accountable to their actions.
Right.
So we want to be strict with the criminals committing crimes. And in New Jersey, they're not strict with the criminals, they're strict with the law-abiding citizens. Because in fact, you cannot carry a firearm in the state of New Jersey except for certain exceptions.
Right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I even know of cases where retired and, believe it or not, even active duty law enforcement have been arrested in New Jersey for carrying because they didn't get permission from the state ahead of time, even though they are covered under the federal law called LEOSA, the Law Enforcement Officers Safety Act, because that was created again back in probably the late 90s, early 2000s, because there was a genuine concern that retired or off-duty cops might run into somebody they had arrested or locked up years before, and they would be defenseless on the street.
Right.
So what they did, the federal law covers all 50 states. If you have served for at least 5 years in law enforcement, whether that's corrections or deputy sheriff or a small town, state police, it doesn't matter. You are de facto permitted to carry a sidearm in all 50 states. I know for a fact that people have been arrested legally carrying in New Jersey under that statute because they're just so anti-gun, they don't care.
Absolutely. They arrested, I wrote a story about this for Human Events a couple of years ago. There was a lady in Pennsylvania, and she basically, she had a concealed carry permit from Pennsylvania. She had her firearm, in her glove compartment.
Right.
And she just, kind of had to come into New Jersey. She just had to, like for 5 minutes, she just had to pass through New Jersey just to get to the location she was going. And she gets pulled over. And the first thing out of her mouth is, "Officer, I want to let you know that I'm armed. I have my firearm. I have a concealed carry permit, and it's in the glove compartment." Guess what?
Yeah.
Well, she's in the state of New Jersey, so she gets arrested.
Right. That was Shannon Allen.
Yes, exactly. You
I'm
remember
friends with
that?
her.
We talked about that before.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You might have even picked me up to the story, if I remember.
It's been a few years. It's hard to,
It's been a few years.
and I hate to say this, but it happens so often up there. It's hard to keep track.
Yeah, really, I know, and that's the thing. And it's also, I think, a good argument. And I want to ask your opinion about this. And I know it's a little off topic, but what do you think about a federal law for concealed carry, across states?
Reciprocity.
Reciprocity.
Yeah, that's a really difficult one for me. With my I have a very libertarian philosophy. I absolutely do believe, and I believe that a bulletproof argument can be made that your right to carry for self-defense should be recognized in all 50 states. Basically, in the Chicago v. McDonald decision, which incorporated Heller versus D.C., against all the states via the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, to my mind, that by itself is enough to mandate that you have to be able to carry in all 50 states.
Right.
The flip side of that, where I get a little uncomfortable, is the states' rights issue and the 10th Amendment. And how far do we really do we want to open that door? It's not enough. My concerns about that aren't enough for me to say, no, we shouldn't have reciprocity. I know people on the pro-2A side that do make that argument, that they're so worried about opening the door on the states' rights issue that they'd rather not have reciprocity at all.
Right.
And they make some very compelling arguments. But for me, if our driver's licenses, which driving, contrary to popular belief, guys, driving is not a right. It is a state-issued privilege, okay? You would not believe how many people think that they have a right to drive a car. So if our driver's licenses,
but not to own a car.
if our driver's licenses are standardized and recognized in all 50 states, and driving a car is not a right, it's very difficult for me to understand how somebody can credibly argue that your Second Amendment rights shouldn't be valid in all 50 states.
Right, it just should be anyway.
Right.
And it's the same thing, with open carry, because open carry was never, legal. All 50 states, we had open carry, and then the states individually started blocking the open carry.
Right.
And that's sort of part of the argument some of us have with reciprocity, and that's that the states, are not respecting the licenses from other states.
Right.
And, they make a good argument because it really is difficult to be a gun owner and travel.
Right.
So you kind of have to spend like days and days researching what the state laws are, and it's really unfair. I feel like I'm being punished.
Yes.
All the time. I feel like I'm a law-abiding citizen. Why am I being punished?
Right. And on the open carry subject, I mean, and that's we could do a whole entire episode just on that. But I'll touch on a couple of things really quickly. People don't seem to realize or understand that for, I don't know, 160, 175 years in the United States, open carry was the norm.
The norm, exactly.
And society had, the way society viewed it was that it was the people that hid that they were armed that were up to no good.
That's right.
That they were trying to seek an advantage and ambush someone. And it was the good guys that displayed that they were armed. So people knew right away. And I mean, because of what I do, I have family and a ton of friends that are in law enforcement at every level, state, local, federal, you name it. No matter how many sheriff's organizations or the FOP or whatever you name the association that claims that police do not support open carry, I can say definitively that every officer I have ever spoken with says the exact opposite. That they actually feel more comfortable knowing that the person is armed because they can see it, instead of having to worry about, is the guy hiding something and ready to ambush me? And on to your topic of, we're talking about reciprocity. I'm literally 3.5 miles from the state line between North Carolina and South Carolina. And when I first moved here from Texas, I had to, take my carry class. I had to wait for SLED to process the paperwork and the permit and all that. And South Carolina and North Carolina have very different laws about how you can keep a gun in your vehicle if you don't have a carry permit. In South Carolina, by law, I was required to keep it in my center console or my glove box. In North Carolina, if I didn't have a carry permit, I was required to keep it on the seat or on the dashboard in full view.
Wow.
So I could literally drive 3 miles, and if I forgot to take it out of the glove box or the center console and put it where people could see it, technically I was breaking the law. Now, of course, once I got my carry permits, that all went away. North Carolina and South Carolina have reciprocity with each other. But that just is a good simple illustration of how the differences in state law from state to state to state. New Jersey does it on purpose. They hate guns so much, they go out of their way to create laws that trap people. And,
right.
they do it because
That's
they want to discourage. They want to discourage as many people as possible from having or owning a gun. In other states, I don't think it's intentional. I think they just don't think about the subject enough when they write the law. But it still creates a situation where you can inadvertently commit a crime with absolutely no intent.
That's right. That's how they were getting people in Florida too, because there was an accidental exposure.
Right. Yes.
And there was a lot of, it went to the Florida Supreme Court, the issue. And prosecutors are supposed to be not focusing on the accidental exposures.
Right.
It's written in the law.
Right.
They really, we're looking, if you're gonna, if open carry is illegal in the state of Florida, which it is, go after, you're going to have to go after, prosecute the people who are actually open carrying in public, not the people who have a concealed carry permit and maybe have an accidental exposure.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because when I lived there, I worked for a guy that was a retired Navy SEAL. He had seen some a tour of duty over in Beirut in '83 when the Marine barracks got bombed. Nicest guy in the world, but he had a carry permit. And, he was kind of getting me up to speed on everything because I was new to the state. And he talked about how he had been in a Walmart one time and reached for something on a shelf. And he didn't even realize it happened, but his shirt rode up. And, he just goes about his day and he's doing his shopping and everything. And he says he gets to the exit and all of a sudden there's 3 Volusia County Sheriff's deputies are waiting for him and asking him all these questions. And he was completely oblivious. He's like, what? What did I do? Like, what are you talking about? And it turns out some person saw that his shirt rode up, saw his pistol, and lost their minds and freaked out. And he said that the only reason the deputies let him go was because he was an ex-SEAL. And they had enough respect for what he had done for the country. And a couple of them were vets themselves, I think he mentioned. And they didn't agree with the law either. And they at least had the discretion and the common sense to understand he had no idea that he had done that. It wasn't an attempt at intimidation or anything of that nature. And it was actually going to, if they had arrested him and charged him, it would have ruined a very good man. And there was no reason to do that to him. And those types of examples are exactly why, with instructors, you get the, you get one of the classic debates is 1911 or Glock, 1911 or Glock, and it never ends. It's a perpetual debate about which one's better. And you get a lot of that same thing with open carry with instructors and tactical guys about, well, open carry makes you a target. If I'm a criminal, you're the first one I'm going to go after because I can see that you're armed. And the other side says, well, there's a deterrent effect to people knowing that you're armed.
Right.
And I do fall on that side of things where, in New Jersey, I hate to keep going back to New Jersey, but it's such a great example of how bad it is. When I lived there for the last 10 years, from 06 to 16, I started openly wearing an empty holster in protest that I could not get a carry permit at all. Wow. 98% of people in public never even noticed it was on my belt. The 2% that noticed it, almost always it turned into a positive conversation and they started thinking about Wow, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But the idea that just by if you open carry, some two-bit criminal is going to notice it and they're going to target you. From what I know of criminal behavior, it's an absurd argument to make. They are so focused on their goal, which is the cash register or the car or the pocketbook or whatever.
Right.
They're oblivious to their surroundings. You're not going to convince me that your average criminal is going to notice if somebody has a gun on their hip openly carrying in public.
I don't think they are either. And in fact, they want to avoid that. They don't want to get shot at.
Exactly.
Law enforcement.
Exactly. But so, I mean, there are so many reasons that I support open carry. And one of them is what you said, and the guy that I knew, where I don't want to accidentally expose my handgun and have a politically ideological prosecutor or a guy that's looking to rise up and get because what happens with prosecutors? It's a stepping stone to the state house or to Congress.
Right.
So they look for the easy, and this is why these plea bargains happen in New Jersey. They want a 100% conviction rate or a 98% conviction rate. That's why they plea out the gun charge and get the guy to plead guilty to something else, because they want to have another notch in their belt. And I don't want to be the victim.
Everywhere, not just Jersey. Right.
Right. I don't want to be the victim of a guy, a prosecutor or a district attorney that has his sights set on higher office and is going to make an example out of me because my T-shirt rode up and some little blue-haired old lady got scared.
Hey, that happened. Yeah, I want to impress upon the public that, and it's part of the reason why I started this show, Dan, because of all that negative onslaught in the public, and people are really misinformed. So you guys are watching two people who support gun rights, and we are not criminals. And gun laws routinely penalize law-abiding citizens, and they do not protect us. And the stats are behind us. It's very logical. If you look at the data, areas that have strict gun control laws actually have higher crime rates. Because what happens is that the criminals are armed, and they always get their, well, 98% of the times, very high rate, is that they purchase their firearms in the black market. Okay, so they're not getting the NICS background check. They're not following the laws anyway. They are obtaining their firearms. We're not stopping them from obtaining them in the black market by penalizing law-abiding citizens, making it more difficult for us to protect ourselves. You know, it's like clear as day. So clear to me, and I want to impress upon the public that we are the NRA.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
look at us. I'm not a criminal. You're not a criminal, Dan.
No, and not and the I mean, there's so much we could get into. Like I said, we probably are going to have to do like an episode a month to cover everything.
You got it.
I'm glad that you mentioned about the criminals always getting their guns, and I don't know if you've seen this episode, and now it's several years old, I will admit. But do you remember when John Stossel was on 2020?
I do.
John Stossel did an interview, if I remember correctly, in Newark at the state prison with a dozen hardened criminal convicts that were in for long sentences. You know, they weren't going to get out with early release or anything because they gave an interview to a reporter. And he asked them, again, in New Jersey, what their opinion about gun laws and how effective they were. And every one of them on video laughed out loud and said, I don't care what the laws are. I'm going to carry no matter what. And you think a gun law is going to stop me from getting a gun? You're crazy. Now, so the predators are telling us it doesn't work. And we still have to keep beating our heads against the wall, fooling ourselves into thinking it's actually going to be effective.
Yeah, it's just not true. You know,
No.
the data just doesn't support
No.
The idea that, you know, either disarming us altogether is going to, you know, stop violent crimes. It just, the data does not support it. It happens all over again. Before, and we're getting, I guess, close to the end of the program, Dan, and before we do, I wanted to just, I didn't get to talk about this last week, but I wanted your opinion as to what was happening in Florida with the public supermarket restaurant chain. Now, they had donated to a Republican candidate for governor of Florida, Adam Putnam.
Yeah.
And because of that donation, these Hogg and et al. People who support him, gun rights fanatic, gun control fanatics, I want to call them. They decided to have like a die-in, in the supermarket where they're laying on the floor and they're supposed to be making a statement about Publix, a private supermarket chain, donating to a candidate that was endorsed by the NRA.
Right.
And somehow that's going to protect children?
Right. No, it's ridiculous. It's not. It's just more of the same ridiculous virtue signaling social justice warrior crap that we've seen since Obama was elected. It's absolutely absurd. I have no respect for any of the CEOs of any of these companies that cave to this kind of ridiculous
all the
social
time.
pressure. I actually wrote an article a couple weeks ago about the tyranny of corporatism, which is incredibly dangerous, and not just on gun control, on a whole host of things. Where we're now in a situation where we now have mega corporations attempting to dictate the extent to which Americans will exercise their rights. And that should be terrifying to everyone. These are not elected officials. We have no way to recall them. We have no way to throw them out of office. We have no way to hold them accountable other than not patronizing their businesses. But the idea that a corporate CEO should be able to limit or determine the extent of an American's rights based on his own personal ideology should be terrifying.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It is terrifying. I'm terrified of them.
Yeah.
And the corporations, they're like, because some group of teenagers complained about NRA, we're going to cancel their, we're not going to do business with the NRA. That's bad business.
Right.
And members, we just go somewhere else.
Right. I mean, there's been a lot of hype in the last week about, in the mainstream media, about how the first quarter earnings reports for Dick's were not as bad as they had been expected to be. But they glossed over a critical point. The first quarter reports included the time period before Parkland where they were still selling AR-15s and quote-unquote high-capacity magazines. The first quarter reports don't reflect hunting sales, which don't typically ramp up until August or September when deer and turkey season start again. I think it's premature for and it's a narrative that they want. They want people to believe, look, Dick's can hire gun control lobbyists and not sell any more evil guns, and they're not going to suffer, in a way to try to influence other companies to join that movement. And I think it's incredibly short-sighted for those reasons. Let's see what the second quarter reports show. Let's see what the fourth quarter reports show next winter when hunting season has come and gone. That's going to be a much more accurate reflector of whether or not Dick's proposal or what they decided to do had a big blowback on them, or if they got away with it.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, it does take time. You have to see, and you're right, because it's seasonal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't want companies involved in this at all. Like, I don't want them on either side. Just stick to what you do. You have a product, and you market that product, and that's I'm not
like the NFL. I feel the same way about the NFL. You have a job, go do your job, and leave your politics at home.
Right. Exactly. I'm not interested in being told by Bank of America or Dick's or Hertz or Delta. I'm not asking. I'm not interested in their opinion about my rights. I don't care. It's none of their business. So just stay out of it. Just stay out of it.
Agreed, and I hope they do. And I hope that people recognize that. It's your choice. You make your own decisions, and we let corporate America start making decisions for us, or start telling us where our rights, or even just like a group of teenagers. I mean, these kids, they really frustrate me, and I don't want to badmouth children. But I'm sorry, when I was 18, I didn't know anything.
Well, it's funny that you brought that up, because I got banned from Twitter over 2 months ago because I saw something that Emma Gonzalez had said on a TV interview that I had kind of had, like, I caught her in a blatant lie. And I tweeted out, okay, that's it. She's going down. And the context being, as a journalist, I've now caught one of these now, super prominent activists in a flat-out lie that does a lot of damage to her credibility, and I'm going to expose her.
You expose her. Yeah, exactly.
I got banned from Twitter for that. For targeted harassment.
Yeah.
I actually got a phone call from a local FBI agent.
Oh, that's insane.
What did you mean by that? I meant that I write a column for a Pro2A national website, and I found this information, and I was going to expose her. Right. You didn't mean any harm? No. I don't want harm to come to anybody. I have kids of my own. How in the world are you getting to that? How does she's going down equate to I want to harm somebody? Well, could you see how that would be perceived that way? Honestly, sir, no, I can't.
Me neither.
Yeah, so I got a little bit off track.
They have special protection or something?
Right, exactly. And their arguments have always been emotional blackmail. You're either with us or you want dead kids, which is absurd.
Absolutely.
David Hogg, and I don't care. I won't debate anyone, but you're going to be honest about it, or I'm going to take you apart piece by piece. America, David Hogg is not a survivor of Parkland, and here's why. David Hogg, by his own admission, was in another building on this incredibly large campus, hundreds of yards away from where Cruz committed his attack. For David Hogg to say that he is a survivor is no different than if I said, while I was at the airport in the terminal, a plane crashed somewhere on the property, and therefore I'm a survivor of a plane crash. It's ridiculous.
Right. And then he claimed to be in two different places. So he first came out and said he was close by, heard shots, recording with a friend. And then the second account was, I was down the block and I had to jump on my bicycle and I had to, yeah. There's two different narratives here. Like, he has to pick one because they don't match.
No, and I saw right after it happened, and I saved it. The Miami Herald had put out a raw video from him, and he's in a darkened classroom with some of his classmates, and he's interviewing them while the incident is still going on.
Yeah, that's what I saw.
And you can hear him say on tape, "We need more diversity. Come on, guys. We need more of this." What you also hear is other people in the background basically telling him to shut the hell up. Like, there's an active situation going on. Be quiet. Don't attract attention here.
Right.
And nobody talks about that at all.
Behavior. Yeah. And somehow he's like the leader of the Democrats. They just prop him up and give him a lot of attention. He feels good. And they come up with these crazy ideas that make absolute no sense.
Right.
Laying down in the supermarket of Publix does absolutely nothing but make you look like a moron.
Yes. I
really want to, and I'm a parent, and I'm a parent of adults.
Right.
And if my adult sons did something so stupid, I would give them a lip lashing. I just couldn't imagine. Go home, go to college, go read a book, go learn something.
Right.
Please don't embarrass yourself by laying down here as if somehow, somewhere in the world, the corporate supermarket of Publix is responsible for school shootings because they endorsed a Republican candidate. And it really is partisan.
Absolutely.
If you're a Democrat, the last thing you want to do is have a Republican elected. And that's what it's all clearly. This is partisan politics. Putnam is a Republican.
David Hogg, in my opinion, and I did not go to law school, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn several times. David Hogg, in my opinion, came dangerously close to the line of extortion because he publicly demanded that not only would Publix drop their support for Putnam, but that they donate the same amount of money to a gun control group. or he would continue his protests.
Yeah,
That's extortion.
That's a threat.
It's extortion.
Yeah, it's extortion.
When you say to somebody, if you don't do this, if you don't pay me, I'm going to do X negative behavior, that is the textbook definition of extortion.
Right. Like, where's this kid's parents?
You know,
the Democrats, of course, they love him. They prop him up like he's like this awesome. But no, the public's, got to wake up. They got to look at this background.
I saw a great meme the other day about the store protest, and it made me just laugh out loud. It was so funny, and it was a picture of these kids in the aisle at Publix. I don't know what store it was at. It didn't say, but the headline, the scripting was, "This is what a Tide Pod overdose looks like."
I saw that. I thought this is hysterical, and that, who knows? I mean, these kids are. Insane. They grab onto an idea. It's like you're smoking cigarette. They look at you and they just want to do the same thing. They really don't understand.
Yeah, and let's talk briefly about
peer pressure is what I wanted to say.
Let's talk briefly about Emma Gonzalez. Now, I've been publicly on the record that I believe that the strength of the Pro-2A movement and the NRA and gun owners comes from our diversity. People like to latch on to the whole stereotype of it's nothing but a bunch of old white inbred rednecks. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
When the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting happened, I contacted the president of Pink Pistols, the LGBT Pro-2A group, and volunteered to, for free, train any one of their members that wanted to, for free.
That's nice.
If I was a bigot or a homophobe, would I do that? Of course not.
Right. That's fantastic.
I met with Erin Palat from Blazing Sword, who also lives in Florida, who is transgendered, at the NRA convention in Dallas. Had a great conversation, wanted to get a picture with her. Again, if I was bigoted against those kind of people, would I even talk to them? Of course not. So where I'm going with this is Emma Gonzalez, her father immigrated from Cuba. Emma Gonzalez has openly stated that she is bisexual. All these things are fine. I don't care. Whatever. What she doesn't seem to understand in her naive child little brain is that Castro confiscated the guns from the Cuban people and murdered bisexual and homosexual people. So the very policies that she's now demanding we adopt here could very well have cost her her life in Cuba.
That's exactly right. Communist Cuba.
Right. They and I see this with all kinds of kids, even a lot of adults. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you think you are far more knowledgeable or educated or experienced on a topic than you really are. And when it comes to the stuff of rights and the Second Amendment and the First Amendment and all of that, and government and its proper role, it is, in my mind, primarily because civics has not been taught in our public school system properly for 30 years.
Yeah, part of the problem.
People think that, you see all the time, people go on Facebook and they complain about Facebook canceling a post or deleting a post or whatever, suspending them. And the first thing they do is they rant about my First Amendment right to free speech. You can't do that. This is censorship. Guess what, guys? Facebook is a private company. You don't have a First Amendment protection from a private person or company. The First Amendment is a protection from the government.
Right.
People just don't understand how rights work at all.
And especially the Second Amendment, really how important it is.
Yes.
Because it is the teeth. It is the teeth of the Constitution. It's the enforcement capacity. So, and then we just don't know. But the Patriots in the American Revolution, they were able to fight the British because they were armed.
Right.
And clearly, there was no other way to get emancipated from the British without fighting with arms.
And not only were they armed with a lot more than just muskets. People, again, going back, in American history just isn't taught anymore. Colonists owned cannons. Colonists owned coastal warships that were armed. Congress issued what's called a letter of marque to private citizens, authorizing them to go out and attack British supply ships. So it would be like if you or me owned a coastal Navy cruiser today. Citizens had military hardware, and it was routine. And the Kentucky rifle and the Pennsylvania long rifle were considered state-of-the-art firearms in the 1770s. The reason the colonists were so successful against the British was because the British used the Brown Bess musket, and most of the colonial army did also. And they were notoriously inaccurate, and they were very difficult to reload, while the militia had their privately owned Kentucky and Pennsylvania long rifles that had 3 times the effective range and were incredibly accurate.
Oh, wow. I never knew that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Anyone that reads the debates of the various state congressional delegations, the debates around the Constitution in Philadelphia, the writings of the Founding Fathers, the Federalist Papers, etc., anyone that reads them from an intellectually honest perspective cannot get away from the fact that the clear intent of the Founding Fathers was for the citizens to be as well armed as an individual soldier would be.
That's right.
You can't escape that fact.
You cannot. It's all over the, yeah, it is all over the place. And they just completely ignore it. They just avoid it altogether.
Right.
And like you said, when it's not being taught in the schools, so the kids don't really know the difference, or they don't know, but they don't know the real facts, or they don't know the facts.
Right. And as far as bans on AR-15s go, hate to tell you gun controller people, but that's not going to happen. The Supreme Court has made multiple rulings on this issue.
Yeah. It's in common use.
Yeah, in 2008 in Heller, they said firearms in common use and firearms that were modern firearms are both protected. Well, semi-automatic rifles like the AR-15 make up 85% of all firearms in the United States. Semi-automatic firearms have been around since the late 1890s, and AR-15s are the most popular semi-automatic rifle in America. There's about 15 million of them in circulation, not counting all of the other types of semi-automatic rifles. So under 2 different standards established by the Supreme Court, AR-15s are protected whether you like it or not. The AR-15 has never been used by the military, period.
Right, that's another misnomer.
I don't care if a vet tells you that he used an AR-15 in combat in Iraq, like Chris Murphy and other people have said in public. That is a bold-faced lie. And I can introduce you to a dozen combat veterans that will back me up on that. The military has never used the AR-15. And even if they had, in 1939, U.S. Supreme Court, U.S. v. Miller, firearms and weapons particularly suitable for military and militia use are specifically protected by the Second Amendment.
That's absolutely right. And they're just going around, pretending, because they really want gun confiscation.
Absolutely.
So it would be very convenient to outlaw the AR-15 because it would take out 80% of the circulation, as you said. I think that's those are methods, incremental methods for complete gun confiscation. And that, that's part of the reason why I have this show. Dan, is I'm really just trying to educate the public, and you've given us so much information. I'm so happy. But we do have to wrap it up.
Okay.
First of all, I definitely want to have you back maybe in about a month to let's talk about something else because it's a lot of good information I want to get out there, and I want to thank you for being a guest.
Thanks for having me.
Go ahead and let you have the last word.
Like I said, I mean, I agree with you 100%. This is there's so much bad information that's out there. People have to know the facts. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to like what I have to say. But what you will get from me is unvarnished truth that is objectively verifiable. I'm fond of saying gun control is a movement and an ideology that is intellectually, morally, and ethically bankrupt, built on a foundation of lies and emotional blackmail, and that's it. And I can prove all of it. And I don't need to use an NRA source or a Fox News source for all of you critics that like to attack your source. I can prove my case without using any of that stuff.
Nice. That's perfect. Thank you so much, Dan. It's been a great show. Really
Thanks for having me. Take
God
care.
bless you.
All right. Bye-bye.
I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye. This is great.
I warned you, when I get on my soapbox, it's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Yeah, me too. You got here. I can go forever.
Uh-huh.
All right, Dan. So let's touch base in about a month, because I definitely want to have you back on, because you're really incredible. It's been an awesome show.
Thank you. How long does it take to produce everything and get it out?
What'll happen is it'll broadcast on Wednesday.
Okay.
At 1 p.m. off of TLBTV website.
Okay.
And what I'll do is I'll submit a 200-word article.
Okay.
By Monday.
Okay.
And I'll attach the video, and then they'll do like a little promo ad in the beginning, and they'll edit the video if it needs to be, and they'll put a whole bunch of links of all your stuff. So on that little side chat that I made, I just need you to give me your bio, or link me to your bio, and then also give me any links where people can contact you, or people can, find out more about you.
Okay.
And then that'll all be included, in that same web page,
right.
That's archived. So it'll be cool.
Okay. How soon do you need the bio?
By Monday.
Okay. I'll work on it tonight and tomorrow.
All right, cool.
Because I do have to update it. In fact, the one that I have on AmmoLand is outdated because it still lists me as being behind enemy lines in New Jersey.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank God you're not.
Yeah, tell me about it. Okay, yeah, I'll work on that, and I'll Facebook message it to you.
All right. Thank you, Dan. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, bye-bye.